So I have to share with you a few words tonight on behalf of somebody very dear to me, my sister Rivki, who was working on a speech that she was giving in Chapel Hill, right near the university where the Duke University, at the hospital where she had her transplant. She was giving a talk and she asked me to edit it, and I said I'll edit it on one condition, and that is that when you come to Cape Town, you'll re-edit it to be given in the Cape Town format. And she said most definitely. So until Mashiach comes, I don't think she's going to be able to come and give the talk on her own. So I just wanted to share with you a few words that she had mentioned in the context of introducing my parents. The title of her talk was The Born Again Chabad Rebbetzin. And of course, born again in the sense that on September 3rd, 2011, she was given a new set of lungs, and her life started all over again, which it really did in a very beautiful way. But then she continued that life has been a challenge, a very big challenge. Sometimes I just don't know if I can continue, if I want to continue. And at that moment, that's when I remember the things about life that help me get through these times when I just don't feel like I can take the challenges of always being different. I think about the amazing, loving, supporting family I have, but it still never gets easy going in and out of the hospital, at times on 30 seconds notice. Yet, every time my parents were there, each of them together by my side, from the moment we found out that we need to go in. My father, with his irrepressible and at times embarrassing sense of humor. Like, as the paramedics in the ambulance are trying to work on me, he's asking them to give me the biggest needle for the IV because that's what Rivki loves the most. Or my mother always trying to help get my mind off of what's going on at the moment by picturing the long green meadows and deep blue ocean. Not to mention the great funky cars she buys me, like, people who say laughter is the best medicine have never had morphine. And so smiles have always been a part of my parents' life through everything. And I just felt that, why should I keep this great gift for myself? And that it behooves me to share them, even if just for an hour, with all of you. So, who's going first? Thomas first. Ladies first. And without further ado, I give you my dear beloved mother. In yeshiva, when my friends would find out that this teenager calls his mother every single day, they would laugh, but I was the one who laughed last. Because with such a mother, you definitely do want to be speaking every day. And here's your opportunity as well.
Thank you, Ashi. It's something of an overwhelming introduction, and I want to make it clear at the outset that despite all of the facts of our lives over these last years and the unimaginable tragedies that have been our lot, we are not here tonight to, God forbid, give you a manual for tragedies. I hope that nobody can relate to our situation, and I'm looking out at a room full of beautiful, wonderful people, and I know without asking any of you that everybody does have challenges in life. So my purpose here is not to give you a window on how to cope with the unthinkable. Nobody should ever have to cope with the unthinkable. But I want to flip that around, that if we're talking about something, we're talking about a way of life, a way of living, a way of looking at the world that can even provide support to people in a situation such as ours, how much more so can it be mined and used and built on as a foundation to deal with the ordinary, call it the speed bumps on the road of life, the ordinary challenges, and maybe not so ordinary, but to put it into a perspective of not, God forbid, tragedy, but what does one do with challenge? And I think it's important right at the beginning that we establish context. You know, there's an expression that I don't think it's an American expression. There are no atheists in foxholes, right? You've heard that. So there's a version of that that I encountered probably about 20 years ago. There are no atheists in pediatric intensive care units. When it comes to trying to cope with these huge challenges, to reach for faith is almost a universal response. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a way of looking at life altogether, looking at life in its best possible light, looking at life as it can be, looking at a lens for life. Perhaps instead of referring to Maimonides' 13 principles of faith, which sounds so official and formal and a little bit off-putting, I think, if somebody's not into delving for principles of faith, but maybe 13 principles of outlook on life. And not getting hung up, as Jewish people love to do. We love to get hung up in what I do believe and what I don't believe, and what I think I believe and what I used to believe and what I can't believe. Leaving all of that aside, that's not the issue. But just knowing, what does Judaism teach us to believe? And putting aside our own individual struggles, not that that doesn't matter, it does. But it frees us up by looking at it as, what does Judaism teach us? How do we look at life? How do we look at the world? It frees us up to acquire knowledge without being bogged down in our own difficulties. Without going into all 13, I want to just sum up a few. One is that there is nothing that is random, that there is a creator who is, was, and always will be intimately involved with every one of his creations, and that includes every single one of us and every aspect of our lives, not based on merit, just based on the fact that we are his creations. Another, that there's a purpose. And finally, the belief, the teaching, the outlook, life is good. This world is a good place. As King Solomon puts it, Basi Lagani, I have come to my garden. This world is a garden, not just a field where wheat grows, but it's a garden. It's a place of delights. And anything that appears to the contrary is only like the shell of a fruit that has to be peeled away. It doesn't look like that now. And we recognize that. And especially in difficult situations, it can almost seem obscene to refer to the world as a garden. But it is a belief that that's where it's headed. It's headed in a good place, in a good direction, and that we each have a role to play in making that happen. We are not passive spectators. And where we make these things happen, where we bring about the good of life, is not necessarily on the center stage, not of our communities, and not of the world, and not of politics, and not of the 6 o'clock news on television. Where we make this happen is in the day-to-day decisions and choices that each one of us makes. So that's just for context. I want to add just another point to what Ashi had said, Rabbi Ashi, excuse me, about being surrounded by so much love and support from others. Somebody had asked me at one point during their saga, how is it that you don't fall down? How do you manage to stand up? And I said, it's very simple. I am so surrounded by so much love and so much caring and so much just people who just show up in my life that I couldn't fall down if I wanted to. There's too much around me. And I think that, having experienced from the receiving end of what the gift of community is, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have to be the professional, you don't have to know a lot, you just have to show up. Sometimes physically, sometimes with a phone call, sometimes with an email, but just showing up for somebody who needs you. And everybody can identify somebody who needs that extra smile in their life. And the gift of being able to give that is incredible in what it is in your own life. So if I'm talking about the smile that's mine and the smile that's yours, I think one way perhaps to differentiate between the two, if we talk about what's coming from me and we talk about what's coming from you, what's coming from me might be my instinctive, natural reaction to a situation, as opposed to when I'm talking about your smile, the smile that I'm putting on your face. For me, that's referring to the conscious decision that I make. I'm in a situation and I can either react by whatever I feel like, wherever that's coming from, and just go by my own gut reaction, or I can make a conscious choice based on something else, on someone else. A very, very vivid example, that's something that I have lived with for over 22 years, since March of 1994. And it was something, this was actually a few months before our first child who fell ill, became ill. So it was a lesson that I had on board before I actually needed it, and I was able to absorb it as an observer, but something that I have lived with every single day since that time. In March of 1994, my first cousin was in a van full of yeshiva boys who were traveling back to Brooklyn from Manhattan, where the Rebbe had been in the hospital at that time for an eye operation, and the boys had been at the hospital to daven during the time of the Rebbe's operation. The operation was, thank God, a success. The Rebbe was on the way back to his home, back to 770, and so were the yeshiva boys who had been there. And a Palestinian terrorist shot up the van on the Brooklyn Bridge. One of the boys was mortally wounded, passed away a few days later. One was somewhat seriously wounded, had an operation, thank God is fine. A third boy had a light wound. And the fourth boy, my first cousin, was shot in the head. He got off the van, he was conscious, he was speaking. He was rushed into surgery. The doctors came out. My husband and I were there. My cousin is from Israel. His parents were on the way immediately. But we were the oldest ones in the family to be around, so we were part of meeting with the doctors and so on. And the doctor said to us, I give him maybe 5 to 10% chance to recover. We found out later that he really did not give him even 5 to 10% chance. He thought for sure there's no way that he can make it. But he saw how the family was so strong and so hopeful and so positive. He felt that he had to say something encouraging. My aunt and uncle arrived about 2 days later. From the minute that my aunt got off of the plane, immediately, this obviously got a lot of coverage in the media in New York. The television stations were all in the hospital steps, the newspapers and so on. And they were asking her, you know, what do you think? How do you feel? What's going to be? And she was bright-eyed and the big smile on her face. And she's inviting everybody to his wedding. He's going to be fine with God's help. He will recover. And you're all invited to his wedding. I'm collecting names. Invite people to his wedding. And the newspaper, we have the newspaper clippings, we have the television clippings, or clips. She really said it. What was the lesson for me? After one of these times when she spoke, and it was about a week or two after the accident, she had a tiny bit of good news that one of his blood gases was a little bit better. And she got up in front of a huge audience, and with the same big smile, bright-eyed look, and she's talking about how Nachum is going to recover with God's help, thanking everybody for their prayers, and yes, I am inviting people to his wedding. But then she told me that when she came back to the hospital, she said to her husband, she said, you know, when I was saying all of those things, I didn't really believe them. It was a mask. I put on a mask, but my heart wasn't in those words. And what he said to her, and this is the quote that I live with every day. Sometimes the mask that you choose to put on also shows something. You chose to put on that mask. You chose to put on that mask. What did that mean? It meant that there was an environment of hope that was created. It meant that there was an environment of optimism. It meant that there was an environment where the doctors felt empowered to look for every single possible thing that they could do to support his recovery. And I am very happy to tell you that almost to the day, 7 years after the shooting, I stood behind the surgeon on the steps of 770 at the chuppah. Why she chose that mask, I think some of the reasons are obvious. But she wasn't thinking of, well, what do I feel like saying? She felt a responsibility. What could she do as his mother? What could she do? And this was the only thing that she could do, was to create an environment of hope. And so that's what she did. And I thought of that a few years later, when our youngest passed away. He was 6. He had been sick for 2.5 years, but for most of that time he had been in relatively good health. And we sat down to sit Shiva, and somebody said to me, isn't it crazy? At a time like this, when you just want to be thinking about yourself and your own needs and how you feel, and now look, you have to talk to your community. You have to deal with all of these other people. Isn't it awful that you can't even have this time for yourself? Let me tell you, I learned very, very quickly that need was my lifeline. The fact that I was in a position, this was a 6.5-year-old little boy, somebody who had been born in Stamford. He was the only one of our children actually born in Stamford. He had been part of our preschool, part of the community. People were davening, people were giving bone marrow donations. It was a very, very real thing in the community. And I will never forget the sight of a room full of people. The first night that we sat down after the funeral, the first night of Shiva, just in stone, like in silence, with grief-stricken faces, begging for something. My husband's their rabbi. He's their teacher. So he started talking. And that set the tone for the rest of us. And what happened was, we were saying the things that we needed to hear. We needed to hear. It wasn't that the knowledge of what Judaism teaches was something that we had never been familiar with. But I certainly speak for myself. Would those have been the first words on my lips if I did not have to come up with them for somebody else? I don't know. I do know that the fact that I did have to speak to others, far from being a burden, was a lifeline. That was foremost in our minds was our grandchildren. And a number of them are teenagers, and they're, you know, teenagers, and they're thinking, and their emotions are deeply felt and very, very serious. And having to put things into words for them was not something just that was a burden on me, that, and beyond dealing with my own personal grief, that I have to deal with these teenagers. Again, I saw how the experience of trying to articulate something for my grandchildren became my lifeline. And one particular phrase that jumped out at them and at me, and I like watched the words coming out of my mouth as I said them, and I thought, oh yeah, that's right. I said to them, we are, Baruch Hashem, a very blessed family. Thank God we are a family that is blessed over and over and over again. We are a blessed family that has had some very horrible things happen to us. Not denying what happened, but not allowing that to define us. And gathering those bits of good and gathering what is real and building on that. If you've seen Rivki's videos, then you certainly see the incredible, towering talent that she had for that. I can't claim credit. I can't. She went way beyond anything that I could. But there are a few little things that I can say, well, maybe we did plant a seed. You know how children like to hear tell me the story of when I was born? You know, and what happened that day and so on and so forth. Well, for most of our children, it's, you know, the whatever typical adventures and, you know, fairly typical story. Rivki was born in the middle of a snowstorm. We couldn't drive to the hospital. We had to take a taxi. And other than that, most of her birth story was a horrible disaster. She was whisked away to the ICU. She was 3 pounds, 9 ounces. I don't know what that is in kilo, but believe me, it's not a lot. She was tiny. They started her on all different kinds of medicines. They started doing all kinds of tests. They had all kinds of fears about what her condition was. I wasn't going to tell her that as a birth story. And, you know, there's only so much you can get out of a snowstorm. But I had one little thing, and it was real. It was very real. And I said it to her, I told it to her over and over and over again. That before they took you to the NICU, they let me see you. They brought you up close to my face so I could see your face. And I had this vivid image of a bright-eyed look. Now, in my mind, it kind of like grows over the years. I can imagine her smiling and waving and cheering. She was a newborn. She wasn't doing any of those things. But in my mind, the way I spoke to her always of that bright-eyed look, hello world, I'm here. That was what I tried to build for her as this is what happened when you were born. And then everything else that had to be dealt with, we never really talked about that. So in the hospital, she bought a mug from the gift shop. It had huge letters on it, OMG. OMG, my mother was right about everything. She knew I liked the mug. I'm not sure exactly why she bought it, but maybe she was just humoring me. I guess, in summary, I would like to single out two things. One is that if we look at Jewish life and Jewish values, and this is something that's worth many hours of discussion and study and stories. There's so much there, but let me just say it just straight to the point. Children are front and center. Children are front and center in everybody's life. And what I mean by that is, in terms for young people, planning their lives and encouraging the young people in our lives to want to have children, to see children as a blessing, and the more children, the more blessing, to see the responsibility and the joy of raising a child to be a mensch, that's not the responsibility only of their parents or their grandparents, that the whole community, every person of every age, whether you have biological children or you don't, that children are front and center in your life. And if they're not, you can put them there. By relishing the opportunity to develop what a Jewish education is in a community. What does it mean? It's not a need of the parents, and it's not a need of the rabbis and the teachers. Every person in a Jewish community, to express life, focus on children. There's our own inner child. We never stop being the child that needs teaching and guidance. But that focus on life, that focus on developing life, and life as a Yid, life as a Jew, and the tremendous joy and privilege of being part of that happen, it makes you young, it gives you energy, and it's not about biology, it's about where you put your heart, and where you put your connections, and where you put your resources, what's important to have happen. There is nothing more energizing and more comforting and more life-giving than building the lives of young children. And the one other point of being able to build on the positive, we start our day, it's not something that we picked up from Oprah or other things of the modern culture, although it's a very nice trend to see that it's happening. The attitude of gratitude, that's how Jews live. Starting every day, the first thing we say, thank you. Thank you for another day. Thank you for giving me back my soul. Thank you for my life. Thank you. I take something, a piece of food in my mouth, and thank you. Thank you. And when we are aware of how many blessings we have, of course we're also aware of the blessings that we need and the blessings that we want. And we don't have to lose sight of that. But thanking for the things that we have gives us a foothold for the things that we want. Our family took as a motto, when our youngest became ill, we didn't want to make promises that we couldn't keep and say what would happen or wouldn't happen, but we could take the words of the prophet. The words of the prophets are true. And if we don't see them yet, then we know that we will. And we took the words, that's a very beautiful melody that's sung to the tune, to these words, where God promises, "V'harikaisi lachem bracha ad bli dai." I will pour blessing upon you, with blessing without end. Ad sheyivlu sifsasechem milomar dai, until your lips will become tired of saying enough. And we used to joke in our family, when will we say enough? And talk about all of the, getting rid of all of the medical equipment and getting rid of the need for the doctors and the hospitals and so on, but that we're focusing on a time that Hashem will pour blessing down on all of us until we just can't even say enough anymore. And may that happen very quickly in our times. Thank you.
Now you know why I called her every day.
Oh.